Good morning from Bergen, and welcome to this fifth in a series of seminars on China and Africa. We have explored in previous seminars different aspects of China's role as provider of development aid, China's role in relations to the debt challenge and issue in Africa, China's role in industrialization, China's role within the African Union. And today we zoom in on the role of the Chinese fishing fleets in Africa. And we have a very exciting team, list of panelists to address the issue. And as moderator of the discussion, we have Professor Ragnhild Overå. She's a professor at the University of Bergen in its geography department, and she has a long career in researching and publishing around small-scale fisheries in Africa and in Ghana in particular. And she's also a former research fellow of the Christian Michelsen Institute in Bergen. Welcome, and the floor is yours, Ragnhild.
Thank you. Well, I thought I would start with two images emerging from my fieldwork experience from the shores of Africa, from a fishing community in Ghana. This was in 1991 when I did the fieldwork for my master's thesis there. And when I was talking to the women I was working with who were local fish traders, and we would sit there and we would look out and we would see some trawlers far out there on the horizon, which was a bit surprising to me. So I began to ask them what this was all about. And they said, found out that some of the richest women in the community had bought big canoes, especially for the purpose of going out to the trawlers to buy the bycatch from these trawlers. And they also provided provision to these trawlers. And there were men in the community, some of whom had worked on board the trawlers as crew members who had now contact with the captains, etc. There were local male brokers who were organizing the trade. So there was a high competition among the local women to buy this bycatch from the trawlers. And there were problems where this lucrative trade led to a breaking of social norms of collaboration and wealth redistribution in the community. And the trade of fish from the trawlers induced new local divisions and power hierarchies. But the bycatch from the trawlers was also a very valuable source of fish to trade and eat, especially during the local fisheries low season. This was in 1991. Another image that comes up is that in 2018, I was revisiting a fishing community where I had done fieldwork in 1995 near the harbor city of Tema. And the fish landing beach that was there did not really exist anymore. Instead, there were walled compounds of yellow four-storied buildings, which were residential quarters of Chinese workers, working in large construction and industrial projects, usually funded by loans from the Chinese state, with the profound spatial consequences for farmers and fishers in these coastal communities. So these two images tell two stories for me. Firstly, that the Chinese exploitation of resources in African waters have depended on involvement by local African populations who also maximize their own interests. And these numerous encounters and interactions have profound social, economic, political, and environmental consequences. Secondly, when looking back 30 years in time, it is clear that the frequency and intensity of the Chinese presence in African waters and along African shorelines has escalated enormously. The impacts are therefore now much more profound and far-reaching. Today, the exchange of bycatch for provisions between trawlers and local fish traders has become a highly profitable business, where trawlers now target anchovy and sardinella and other fish that they are not licensed to fish, to the extent that it has led to serious overfishing and declining catches for the local coastal small-scale fisheries. And today, reports claim that 90% of Ghana's industrial fleet is linked to Chinese ownership, despite that foreign vessel ownership is prohibited by law. It is, as they call it in Ghana, an open secret that the Chinese trawling companies and others, for example, from the EU, obtain fishing licenses and quotas through registration of their vessels in the name of a Ghanaian, so-called fronting companies. So over the past decade, 70 to 105 bottom trawlers are registered under the Ghanaian flag that are fishing in the economic exclusive zone. And since 90% of these are Chinese, Ghana now has the largest registry of Chinese distant water vessels outside of China. So the fact that the local African business people, who may well be high-ranking politicians too, make the illegal trawling hard to attack. Rather, in fisheries governance, it is the small-scale fishers who are blamed for the declining catches. Other issues related to the Chinese fishing fleets relate to labor exploitation and violation of human rights of trawler crew members recruited locally, and the establishment of Chinese feed factories milling nutritious and locally relished fish, such as sardinella and anchovy, into fish meal to feed China's massive aquaculture industry. In this seminar, we will take a closer look at the rationales behind the Chinese expansion, as well as the explanations for and consequences of the African involvement with the Chinese fishing fleet. What are the forces behind the expansion of the distant water Chinese fishing fleet to Africa? Do these motivations differ from EU fleet's operations in Africa? What is the modus operandi of the Chinese fishing fleets? I have a strong feeling that my own understanding needs to be nuanced. And today I'm looking forward to learn more from 4 experts in this field. And so I will introduce the first one, so Edyta Roszko. She's a senior researcher here at the CMI, where we are located now. And she has a PhD from the Max Planck Institute of Social Anthropology and Martin Luther University in Germany, where she carried out ethnographic research on Chinese and Vietnamese fishing communities in the common maritime space of the South China Sea. Bridging different historical periods and countries, the question of the mobility, migration, and connectivity of fishers compelled her to historicize fishing communities and to work beyond the framework of the nation state and area study. And she just launched her new book entitled Fishers, Monks, and Cadres, Navigating State, Religion, and the South China Sea in Central Vietnam. So Edyta's European Research Council Starting Ground project, Transocean, I'm sure you will talk more about this, about transoceanic fishers, expands her geographical interest beyond Vietnam and China to include other global regions in Oceania and in West and East Africa. Yeah, so Edyta, I give the word to you.
Thank you, Ragnhild, for this introduction and also for opening this discussion with a beautiful ethnographic vignette. So maybe, yes, I will start from the project which I'm leading with 2 of my postdocs, Xufei and Zhou. Basically, what we are looking is at the knocked-on effect of the South China Sea dispute to other oceans, whether there is Atlantic, Pacific, or Indian Ocean, and how the development in the South China Sea pushed Vietnamese fishermen to Pacific and Chinese fishermen to Africa. So, and these fishermen, they have to navigate seas, market, and sovereignties, and their mobilities in a way meet, interact, and collide with the mobilities of local fishermen, as you said, whether they are African or the Pacific. So we're basically looking at these two ends. But today, for the talk, I don't want to talk about the South China Sea or developments which are happening there, but take a little bit wider perspective on the forces behind Chinese expansion to Africa, and ask exactly, this question, whether they are different from the European interest in the sea. And I think at the beginning, we have to ask ourselves why the ocean is so important, why it is the only interest on Chinese side, or we also could observe that in the case of Europe. And what I could see, there is some uncanny parallels between Europe and China in the terms how they attach the attention to the ocean in the 21st century. So I'm sure most of our audience are familiar with the concept of blue growth, the European concept of blue growth, which basically identifies ocean as having a high economic growth potential, and that includes aquaculture, coastal tourism, marine biotechnology, ocean energy, and very controversial seabed mining. In case of China, we talk about opening ocean, Kaifa, Haiyang, or development of the ocean. So President Xi Jinping said that in 21st century, the ocean and seas have increasingly important role to play in China's economic development and opening up the outside world. So what I argue that basically the two discourses are very similar, because what they talk about untapped possibilities for income, for a job, which are connected with the ocean and sea spaces. So basically the ocean is seen as a last frontier which the humanity has to conquer. And for China, it is important because it's not only it's paramount for the maintenance the country political stability, for the food security, but it also generates employment and tax revenue for sustaining, for example, welfare state. And also, if you look at the map, China has a long coastline. So the exploitation and protection of that coast is very important for China, but any sustainable development is basically has to be achieved after the coast is exploited and protected. So I would say that's the difference probably between Europe and China, that Europe adds the word sustainability to the expansion and the extraction of the resources. But both countries talked about also China is now starting to talk about the sustainability, starting to attach more attention. I think Hank will show that in his PowerPoint when they talk about advanced ecological civilization, about the ecological importance, eco-friendly reefs. So we have all this discussion similar like in Europe. So in Europe, if you look at the discourse about the blue growth strategy, which I just look at, so you find this a narrative of the new border of humanity. The future is bright blue, smart blue economy. So which basically gives us idea about the importance of the ocean. So, but once again, let me come to these forces which are basically push China to Africa. The recognition that most countries, African countries, don't have capacity to monitor and basically also to extract resources from exclusive economic zones incentivize the inclusion of Article 62 in UNCLOS, and I will read that. coastal states shall determine the capacity to harvest the living resources of the exclusive economic zone. Where the coastal state does not have the capacity to harvest the entire allowable catch through agreements or other agreements, give other states access to surplus of the allowable catch. So these provisions allows the governments like EU, but also China, to get into agreements with African countries and basically extract the resources. And these agreements sometimes take under the label of sustainable fishing partnership agreements. So, for example, recent research points duplicity of the EU common fishery policy in third countries. And by duplicity, I mean the double standard or inconsistency in the application of policies. So what's happening is that both China and Europe move the overcapacity of their fishing fleets from their own coastal waters to Africa, and basically they move the decline of the fish to other places. So China and EU fishing agreement with the West African, particularly West African countries, continue to target fragile fish stock and undermining local livelihoods that depend on fish for food and income. So this fishing agreement means that not only a low value is paid to those coastal countries' government compared with the benefits to private EU and China fishing companies licensed under them. So the amount which is paid for this agreement is very low compared to the profit which fishing fleets could gather. And both Chinese and European fleets are subsidized, and it's well-known fact that both subsidies encourage and basically they contribute to the illegal fishing, because if the countries, they don't have capacity to monitor their coast, it's very difficult to ensure that the fishing catch is sustainable. So that's what I want to actually bring to the picture, that EU enters the agreement, Sustainable Fishing Partnership Agreement, with fragile countries such as Liberia or Guinea-Bissau, knowing that these countries do not have monitoring capabilities and maritime assets to ensure to measure and control the exploitation of their fisheries. So, and they provide subsidies to fishing companies under Sustainable Fishing Partnership Agreement, which without these subsidies, it would be not financially feasible for the European fleets go to Africa. And the same for China. China gets the subsidies, which would make not feasible for Chinese fishing fleets to go so far as Africa. And they can go on fuel, meaning that fuel subsidies make operation on the high seas profitable, even if there is hardly any fish. So even if they don't get any fish, they could still make some profit on just expanding to the high sea. So I think we have to also look at ourselves, that it's not only Chinese fleets, but also European fleets overexploit stock in Africa through private licensing, chartering, joint venture agreement, and high sea fishing. So what you said, Ragnhild, about Ghana, and that in Ghana it's illegal to have foreign fishing trawlers directly operating in Ghana, but both Chinese and the European could get that through using the Ghanaian companies as a kind of shell for their activities. So the difference is that Europe add the word sustainability to their fishing operation, and China doesn't have illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing regulations. They don't claim that they are global policemen, and they don't have common fisheries policies on sustainable partnership agreement. What we know, research also shows that EU selectively applies regulation to prevent the illegal fishing. And for example, research shows that the yellow cards were given, which is warning against illegal fishing, were given to the countries with EU trade the most, and the red cards were given to the countries where Europe trade less. So what it shows that agreement like Sustainable Fishing Partnership are primarily business agreement aimed at maximizing profit and ensuring sustainable fishing at home by maintaining, if not increasing, fish supply from third country waters, regardless that they undermine the marine resources. So my point is that the rationale, the logic behind the expansion fishing, Chinese fishing fleets of European, in fact, is not that different, is the pursuit of profit, of income. The difference is that we in Europe add the word sustainability, which basically purifies the extraction and accumulation. And they are already radical voices with the United Nations, which say that blue growth has to be, and the sustainability goals has to be divorced, separated from growth and endless accumulation. And even, you know, if the pandemic would be not happened, it looks that we have trouble to achieve the sustainable development goals in 2030. So this is the issues which I, in a way, wanted like to bring in picture when we will now go to the individual cases when Han can talk about the Chinese subsidies and the impact on the environment, and Xufei talk about the also illegal operation, Chinese operation in Madagascar. So to keep in mind that basically the word economy is connected, and that we have to also look at that we are part of the problem, and with the expansion of fishing fleets. And probably the one solution is, which we can talk and consider, is whether the fishing, the industrial fishing should take place at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yes. Who should fish the fish which is in the ocean? That is the question. You know, there are plenty of people out there who could gain from making a living doing that. So really, this is a distribution question of who should have access to the resources.
Exactly.
And to the food. Well, thank you very much, Edyta. This was a great introduction. And I think that we are now going to have presentation by Han. So I will introduce him. Will it come up on the screen? Yes. While he comes up, I will present him. So Han Zhou is a postdoctoral researcher here at the CMI. And he obtained his PhD at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. And prior to enrolling at SUAS, he worked consecutively as a research assistant and researcher in the China and Global Security Program at Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, with a focus on China's foreign policy and China-Africa relations. And he has also worked as a program officer at the China and the Developing World Program at Oxfam, Hong Kong. In the Transocean project here at CMI, he works on the interaction of African fishers with Chinese fisheries in Africa, especially I think in Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. So we are looking very much forward to hear about your insights, Han. The word is yours.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to need the colleague at CMI to put on the slide, actually. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. So great to be here. So today I'm going to follow a bit after Edyta's presentation, which actually give very good kind of comparative angles on between Chinese and European, if we can call it, approach to long distance water fishing. And as you know, given the current global pandemic, we are actually not able to carry out any fieldwork at the moment. So I present today is a very early stage kind of kind of research literature review or just some statistics that I have on, or I collected as related to Chinese long distance water fishing activities, as well as some research idea I intend to pursue during these postdoc programs, basically. Next slide, please. So the first slide actually show you the exponential growth of Chinese DWF, distance water fishing activities in the past about 10 years or so, actually, between 2008 and 2019. That's the data we can have currently. What you see on the graph it's both the increase in numbers of fleets as well as in terms of the kilowatts, so the power capacities of Chinese DWF fleets. And on average, actually, the average engine power was almost doubled within this period, from 537 kilowatts in 2008, doubled to over 1,000 kilowatts in 2019. That's the average engine power of. Oh, sorry, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I missed the first slide in my. I need to give me a minute. Sorry, next slide. Sorry, it's just a gap from my side. Sorry, I need to start from the beginning. Sorry. First, give you an idea of the increase of Chinese DWF fishing fleets and the catch actually. So give you first a historical review. China's first DWF fleets actually starting from 1985. The Chinese government sent about 30 vessels to West African countries, mainly to Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, and Sierra Leone. And since then, in the past 10 years or so, the catch of Chinese DWF fishing has always been doubled from 1 million to 2.17 million tons, currently in 2019. And also the number of DWF fleets has also doubled from 1,400 in 2008 to 2,700 in 2019. And as you can see in the graph, actually, especially from the orange line, there's exponential growth between the period of 2012 to 2014, where you see there's actually an increase of 630 new fleets within just 3 years. And this increase is almost equal to the period of the previous 10 years between 1994 to 2010. And currently, we know that by 2019, there's about 178 distance water fishing enterprises operating in China and overseas. And their vessels basically present in 42 countries' economic zones, 7 regional fishing management organizations, jurisdictions, and about among those 2,700 vessels, we have about 1,600 vessels operating actually in the high seas of the Pacific, Indian Ocean, Atlantic, and Antarctic, basically. Next slide, please. The next slide actually is the one that I accidentally jumped into in the first slide, sorry. It's about this growth in terms of both the numbers, but also the average power capacity of this fleet. So what you see in the past 10 years is actually not just the increase of number, but actually the increasing presence of more powerful and more capable fishing fleets of Chinese long distance fishing activities abroad. So as you see in the graph, actually, the average engine power of Chinese fleet has almost doubled as well. So from 537 kilowatts to over 1,000 kilowatts in 2019. So which basically enabled Chinese fishing fleets to go abroad, to go much further than what it had used to be. There is actually a kind of, this is sort of like a state stimulated kind of policy. So actually, if you're passing through what the Chinese government has been done in the past 10 years, you can see numerous actually state policy trying to promote on the one hand the building, but on the other hand also the transformation, also the upgrading of Chinese DWF fleets. For instance, MOA, that's the Ministry of Agriculture, in 2012 promulgates this policy called Opinions on Promoting the Sustainable and Healthy Development of Distant Water Fishing, where it basically advocates China need to raise the capacity of the fleets, also strengthen policy support to the upgrading and construction of the fleet. And in the same year as well, the National Development Reform Commission and MOA jointly published another opinions, basically state that China would provide state subsidies to fleet upgradings, and that can be the subsidies can cover basically up to 30% of the total cost of the construction of the new fleet. So as a result of such state kind of promoted subsidies, what China ends up in the past 10 years is actually to have a more professional and more standardized and modern fleet available to its DWF fishing companies. So in 2013, about 50% of DWF fleets are less than 10 years old, and currently in 2017, the data we can collect for the most recent statistics shows that about 52% actually are less than 5 years old, and 72% are less than 10 years old. Next slide, please. In this slide, so that's kind of give you a broad review of the overall national pictures. But behind these national pictures, the tendency we always have to kind of homogenizing China deserves some kind of qualification. So what we can see in both these two graphs on your right hand side is the data I collect from two provinces located in the coastal area of China. So behind the outpouring, if you can call it, or the expansion of China's fishing activities abroad, it's also there's a strong provincial actually incentive to promote such activities. So for instance, from these two provinces, one is called Fujian, located in the southern part of China, and the other is called Shandong, located in the northern part of China, just right across the Korean Peninsula. And here you can see that actually there's a huge increase in the past 10 years as well. Again, the increase mostly comes from the period of 2012 to 2015-ish. And then later it's actually the curve kind of flattened. But overall, between the period 2012 and 2016, about 65% of the increase in numbers of fleets on national level actually comes from these two provinces. And apart from those state subsidies I just mentioned in the previous slide, actually lots of these provinces, they come up with their own subsidies. And these subsidies can come from both the provincial and also the municipal governments. For instance, here I just cite two examples to you in the case of Fujian. And for time's sake, I would just probably mention about, for instance, the second policies promoted by the Fujian government between 2015 and 2017. They will compensate, for instance, if what this policy says that if the policies of the host countries, fishing policies of the host country change, but the fishing vessels decide to stay there and decide to upgrade the fleets there, they are going to subsidize about 200,000 RMB, so the Chinese yuan per boat. And if the fishing company decide to change the fishing ground, for instance, switch from their current fishing ground to another fishing ground in Morocco, Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Uruguay, they're going to subsidize about 500,000 RMB per boat as well. And there's also other policy within these measures promoted by the provincial government, stating that the provincial government is going to strengthen credit support, going to ease or modernize customs control in order to facilitate trade between these Chinese DWF enterprises. And the last measures they come up with is actually to encourage the recruitment of foreign captains within China as well. Next slide, please. So those are kind of the overall picture, both on national, also provincial levels. But there are certain policy changes in the past couple of years. As you see in the previous graph, there's actually the curve of increase actually kind of flattened in the past 5 years or so. And as also Edyta has mentioned in her previous presentation, there is I would say there is actually a convergence in terms, at least in terms of policy discourse, in the sense of this idea of sustainability or sustainable exploitation of marine resources, both by the EU and China on this regard. So here I highlight some couple of key policy change that we can observe in the past 5 years or so in China. First is basically the most important national plans promoted by China's government every 5 years or so. So in the last one, the 13th National 5-Year Plan is actually the first 5-year plans that state its objective in the long distance water fishing that is actually move away from the previous plan, which actually keep on calling for the expansion of fleet size and the total catch. But the 30th National 5-Year Plan basically changed from these directions. And it actually put first a cap size of the fleet to 3,000 vessels. And he also predict that China will reach about 2.3 million tons catch. That is actually not much increase if you look at data before 2016. And he also promoted or advocated zero growth of DWF fishing companies within China. And finally, the final goal regarding DWF activities is China expect that 65% total catch can be transported back to China. And after this promulgation of the national plan, usually within China systems, you have the Ministry of Agriculture that will promote its own sectorial 5-year plans. And in those sectorial 5 plans, you can also observe kind of policy change. For instance, what we see here is also China tries to establish the so-called blacklist systems of the DWF enterprises. So in case of they detect or Chinese fishing boats committing, for instance, IUU, there's going to be so illegal, underreported, and unregulated fishing activities. There is going to be a punitive measures promoted, imposed by the Chinese government. And most lately, for instance, in 2020s, there's a revision of the Chinese DWF management regulations. Again, here you see the idea of sustainability that just mentioned by Edyta actually emerged. So what the government nowadays try to advocate is a more sustainable development of DWF and try to put its modern fishing industry to a reasonable size and in a scientifically planned manner, basically. And again, we see this establishment of black systems established on a personnel level. And again, you are going to subject to suspensions or cancellation of your qualification or your licenses in case of funded IUU activities. And one of the important things that, again, mentioned by Edyta in her previous presentation is about this field subsidies. And as she rightly pointed out, that this is one of the main reasons actually drawing out a lot of Chinese fishing activities abroad, because simply sometimes you don't need to do much catching, but you can still make money actually out from this field subsidies. But even in this area, we observe certain kind of policy changes in the past 5 years or so. So this field subsidies for long distance water fishing came about in 2007. Then in 2011, we found there's about 216 million RMB fuel subsidies, and later the data has not been published systematically. But again, we found that in 2014, there's about 418 million renminbi put into these fuel subsidies. But that started to change starting from 2015. The Chinese government actually decided to reduce the subsidies and transfer them to support the upgrading of DWF fleet renovation or transformation. So again, here you see the idea is actually to gradually focusing more on modernizing and upgrading the fleet rather than, for instance, expanding Chinese DWF fleet for the simple sake. Next slide, please. So that's the kind of the presentation I give you on this overall picture of Chinese fishing activities. If you look at the statistics, and in terms of literature that we have currently on Chinese DWF activities, you see the most of them actually focus on the scale and illegality of this DWF activities, or they're focusing on the ecological or environmental impacts on the coastal countries. And there are also existing research doing on the rationales behind Chinese expansions of DWF, mainly tracing it back to China's own domestic issues as well as Chinese geopolitical ambitions. And what we see here is actually sort of gaps, as I outline here. First, we often kind of flatten the African landscape here. We don't actually know what is the role of the African fishermen or the government in this bilateral engagement. And as Professor Overå mentioned in the very beginning of her introduction, the African, whether it's a fisherman or the government, actually involved in such engagement on an everyday basis. But that side story is often neglected or often condensed into a single story of a victim, basically. And that's something that I would like to challenge in this postdoc project, if possible. And secondly, is the tendency to basically assuming ontologically China as a homogeneous entity, and that is actually a tendency we still have very much nowadays, given the current geopolitical tension as well. But DWF activity in nature is very much heterogeneous, and then you can see fishermen engage with different professional identities. There's a different size of Chinese competence involved, different nature of it, state-owned or private, and all this present a very different realities of how Chinese fishing activities actually engage with the locals. And lastly, what we also very seldomly heard of in the existing research is this quotidian actions, experience, and life words of peoples of both Chinese and African fishermen, how they engage, how they actually live with each other. Next slide, please. So in this postdoc project, I'll just briefly present some of the research ideas I have, and hopefully I can deal with in the next 2 years or so. The first ideas I have is to look at the documentary governance of Chinese DWF activities, and the second main research components I would like to pursue is regarding the life worlds at sea and ashore for both Chinese and African fishermen. Next slide, please. So regarding the documentary governance aspect, the question that I think we need to ask is really, how does the growth of Chinese DWF actually interact with the local legal regulatory environment of coastal states? So we have the tendency of over-characterizing the Chinese DWF activities legal, but such discourse prevent us from empirically grounded examination of the realities referred to. So here I refer to sort of the documentary term in anthropology, which basically try to examine the significance of formality in economic governance. And I want to put this angle also in the field of DWF activities, try to see how Chinese DWF enterprises as well as fishermen try to establish connection with the state bureaucrat in the host countries, in African countries, through this angle of bureaucratic things, for instance, how they attain approvals, how they attain permits, paperwork, receipts, stamps, and signatures in different stages, to actually outline or nuance our understanding of their documentary interactions. Next slide, please. The second big components that I'm interested in is basically look at the life worlds at sea, at shore. First is very much the daily routines, how they actually work on their everyday basis on the boats. So here again, I would like to focus on two categories. One is how they change or navigate these different professional categories as fishers, sometimes as poachers, as smugglers, as traders, how they navigate these different professional identities on their each journey. And the second big kind of sub component in this research angles I'm interested in is regarding these maritime legal and spatial categories. Again, here, quite different from the land sovereignty we imagine, where you can actually sort of imagine there is a boundary, but the water is very much fluid. And then here, what I'm interested in is also how these Chinese fishing boats, they can navigate and make sense of this fiscally and legally quite fluid maritime spaces, and how their experience both from the Chinese side, for instance, from the Chinese side, are informed by the experience in South China Sea, and how have the African side that has been informed their previous experience, fishing experience in their regions. Next slide, please. And the very last question I'm interested in is this angle of sociability between Chinese and African fishermen, in terms of, for instance, the social stratification among Chinese fishermen, what they are doing during their long time on board, non-working time on boat, and how they actually interact with their African colleague in terms of recruitment, management, and aspect of sociability. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you some idea of why I try to focus on West Africa, and also why I try to focus on Guinea-Bissau and Senegal, actually. And first, as I mentioned in the very beginning of this presentation, West Africa is the country that received the first Chinese DWF fleets. And actually, contrary to people's common perception, actually, I think the Chinese perception of the importance of West African fishing activities also sort of changed in the past couple of years. So in the 2014 development report of Chinese DWF, advanced by the Ministry for Agriculture, they actually noticed very much the severe difficulties in continuing such sort of unsustainable fishing activities in West Africa. So they actually provide kind of diagnosis of the fishing difficulties in that area, and then provide certain kind of solutions to it. The solution, as you can see in the slide, is also try to basically managing the size of Chinese presence there. And when it comes to Guinea-Bissau, currently the situation is that with the EU agreements between EU and Guinea-Bissau, there's about 15 vessels operating in the sea. And China also have a bilateral agreement with Guinea-Bissau, where it currently allow about 70 vessels operating there. And one interesting fact I want to mention here is actually the current Minister of Fishery, Mr. Malang Sambu, is actually previous Guinea-Bissau's ambassador to China in the previous 10 years between 2010 and 2020. And he recently stated that he wants basically fishing agreements with China along the same line with the EU. And it's actually a very interesting development here, also because of Sambu's own experience in China. He's actually an expert in China in the sense that he graduated from China, doing an undergraduate degree in physics in China back in the 1980s, and actually later also did his master in University of Macau. So now we see sort of a China hand on government in the government of Guinea-Bissau, and it's something that's interesting to look at how he's able to put something more positive for the government or for the people of Guinea-Bissau in the coming years as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. That's pretty much all I want to share today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hang. That was extremely interesting. And I think the kind of study that you are planning to do, not the least, you know, to go into, I think this approach of studying informality and what is actually going on in the interaction between the Chinese vessel owners and the African bureaucrats, for example. I mean, it's a rather challenging topic, of course, but I think that you could do an extremely important work there. There are also very many myths circulating around these types of relationships. So actually to do some ethnographic research on what actually goes on would be extremely valuable.
And I think Hank is very well equipped to that because his previous research was in Uganda when he looked at the construction industry and how this actually permeates our work in a different sector. So I don't have doubt that he will manage. But I think he also said very interesting things to show, which we later probably we could pick up this tension between the central state and the province. So where the different kind of China coming into picture. I found that very interesting. And it would be interesting to maybe unpack this even further.
Indeed. Yeah, we can come back to that in the discussion. And you will also come back in the discussion, Hang.
Yeah, thank you.
But now I will give the word to the next speaker, Xufei, and I will present here. Yes, there you are. Hello.
Oh.
Yeah, Xufei is a postdoctoral researcher also here at CMI at the Transocean project. And he has his PhD in development studies from Radboud University in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And he has extensive field experience in East Africa, especially along the Swahili coast. So now we are moving from the west to the east coast of Africa. In the Transocean project, he examines mobilities of fishers from China to the Western Indian Ocean through the case study of Madagascar. In particular, he aims to pinpoint these mobilities from a multi-scalar perspective. Very welcome for a geographer like me. The historical movement of the seafaring Chinese community, the contemporary state-backed fishing and shipping industries, and the more recent private investments in Africa's unique seafood produce. So we are looking forward to hear more from you, Xufei.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Bergen Global's organization of this seminar and Professor Overå and Edyta's great introduction of our topic. Han has also made a very good explanation about how Chinese fishing fleets look like and how the subsidies work at a very microscopic level. So I will try to further the topic of Chinese fishing in Africa with a broad picture. I try to engage a history of the last 2 centuries and the most recent development regarding seafood supply chain from Africa back to Asia, which effectively speeds up our consumption and overconsumption of ocean resources. My area of interest is the Indian Ocean, and I will, in the next 3 years, examine the role and the mobilities of the Chinese state, migrants, and enterprises in the trans-Indian Ocean fishery business. The design of the study speaks to 4 major topics related to Chinese fishing expansion and China's global footprint in general. First of all, it brings back ocean to the center of the so-called Maritime Silk Road studies, literally. Southwestern Indian Ocean, including the islands and the Eastern African coast, are strenuously included in China's Belt Road Initiative, mostly because of their resources and investment potentials on land. This land-based point of view has missed generally the importance of maritime industry and the marine ecology. Secondly, this study also furthers the largely continent-focused China-African studies, a phenomenal block of area studies in the last 2 decades, put it to an ocean-centered perspective. We in this study have changed our traditional geographical thinking of Africa and believe ocean, either in China-African history or the ongoing interactions, as a major playfield that has made everything else possible. For example, the shipping of mineral resources and the arrival of goods. And please don't forget, even the locomotives and the train coaches need to be shipped by sea first. Thirdly, focusing on the Chinese fishery community fills in a lacuna in overseas Chinese studies. We are now able to understand the trajectories of Chinese migrants, both in the imperial time and contemporary, from their hometown via the numerous islands on the way, arriving at Africa's eastern coast and even maybe further to its western coast. Their occupation and identity as waterborne people has been one of the driving forces of such mobility. Fourthly, this study tries to answer to a pressing issue on China's global ecological impact. Just like other industries, China's fishing industry, both at home and overseas, is one of the largest in the world. Now all the world have realized the huge impact to marine life and local fishermen's life Chinese overseas fishing fleet can cause, and we have seen numerous reports on that. But these Chinese fishermen did not come of a sudden. Understanding why they come to this particular ocean in terms of marine biology, social, economic ties, and fishing technologies will, as I hope, create better dialogue and foster better cooperation with stakeholders for the protection and the recovery of the ocean. I have chosen the great island of Madagascar and the major research object. It is a bit unconventional, as it is neither the current hotspot of combating illegal fishing, for example, those in the Gulf of Guinea or East Pacific, nor, honestly speaking, the country in many respects are under-researched and under-documented, even in the French speaking world. It is, however, a surprisingly missing piece in the epicenter of Indian Ocean's fishing activities. Its nearby regions produce traditionally a big share of shrimps and squids, attracting busy transoceanic fishing fleets and transshipment along the Cape Hope to Malacca route. Madagascar's unique geological formation also breeds an abundance of higher value seafood not seen in many other areas of Africa's coast. For example, rock lobsters, trepans, that is famously the sea cucumbers, and shark fins. Asian buyers, not only Chinese, have long discovered the business opportunities of this particular precious sea produce in Madagascar. Moreover, Madagascar's endangered land species are extremely threatened by the passing transoceanic ships complicit in smuggling rosewood, turtles, and even chameleons under the disguise of fish. Combating illegal fishing in Madagascar is therefore of higher purpose of mission to protect these endangered species and also to protect Madagascar's artisanal seafaring culture that enabled their ancestors' odyssey from Southeast Asia. What enriches Madagascar's role in global fishing industry can be in addition found from the island's agriculture farms, ponds, and estuaries. These are one of the most recent developments in its fishing sector that attracts new investment from China and Southeastern Asia to meet the growing appetite for certain seafood at home. For example, crayfishes, crabs, and eels. An interesting fact about this seafood is that in Europe, one can only find deep frozen Malagasy blue crabs in the supermarkets. But back in Asian markets, they are alive, an important indicator for freshness and higher value of money. As I just mentioned, Madagascar can be seen as an emerging fishing and seafood producer in meeting Asia's gourmet market. Most of the investors nowadays, of course, they come from China or other Chinese-speaking societies in Asia. Technological advancement has enabled the live transport of crabs and other vulnerable ocean species to Asia in maybe 24 hours with minimal loss. However, if we look at the issue from a broader historical perspective, we will know that the Asian buyers did not show up on the island all of a sudden. What I'm so fascinated about the Chinese fishery industry in Madagascar is that there is the complex structure of different Chinese actors it hosts. There are new e-merchants and technological tycoons exploiting the higher value seafood from catching and farming in Madagascar. There are also, since the 1980s, Chinese state-backed fishing enterprises and the transoceanic fleets operating in and nearby Madagascar for many shrimps and squids. Those are what Hong has just introduced and what nowadays the global society concerns most as the typical massive Chinese fishing fleets. Additionally, what makes the Chinese fishery community outstanding in Madagascar is that this country is home to approximately 100,000 Malagasy Chinese. Madagascar actually as a country hosts the third largest Chinese population in Africa, only after South Africa and Mauritius. Their ancestors were brought over as fishermen and laborers from the 18th century. Now they have become an independent ethnic group in Madagascar with deep influence on the island's economy, culture, and politics. It will be a very interesting topic to investigate the role of this established Chinese fishing diaspora play in connecting Madagascar's fishing and aquaculture industry with China, or East Asia at large, including Hong Kong, Singapore, and even Thailand. It bridges different actors at both sides from different time space, creating historical continuum which demonstrates and justifies fishermen's movement from Asia to Africa across the Indian Ocean. Before I conclude, I would like to use a case study to show why we should not simplify Chinese fishing activities overseas, a case from Madagascar exactly. In 2018, a controversial but never successful fishing deal was signed in Beijing, witnessed by the former president of Madagascar as one of his measures to participate in the Maritime Silk Road and the FOCAM meeting, that is Forum of China-African Cooperation. In this deal, Chinese investors would bring 2.7 billion US dollar investment into Madagascar's fishing industry and more than 330 new vessels. To put it in the context, this was larger than Madagascar's annual seafood produce capacity in total, and without the knowing of the relevant authorities back in Madagascar. The plan vanished quickly under the backlash of the of Madagascar's fishing ministry and international civil society. It turned out later that two private businesses were behind that. One from Madagascar for the interest of the president's family, and another one from Fujian province in China. It is also highly possible, I believe, that in order to make the deal, there was a larger syndicate behind these two businesses involving the transnational Malagasy Chinese business network. We will perhaps never know that without deeper investigation in the future. This case is a perfect example of the complexity of the multiple political and business parties in the trans-Indian Ocean fishery communities. It also shows that how vulnerable local and artisanal industry and the environment can be when facing the global economic juggernaut. Hopefully, this study will eventually advance our knowledge of this force of complexity on the sea. I will end here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xufei. Again, your research is going to be very fascinating, and I really like this historical angle that you have, you know, of the history of the Chinese who live at Madagascar, and their role presently in this ocean expansion that China is conducting. And probably also with you, we could come back to this issue of, you know, the different, to divide up this monolithic whole of China into more smaller provincial entities. And, you know, that could maybe be very interesting to look at in Madagascar. Where do they come from in China and so on? And what kind of social networks and cultural ties do they have, etc. So indeed, very interesting. Do we have another speaker now or not? Do we have
Jinping? Yeah.
Jinping? Is she here or?
Yeah, is she? Okay.
Oh, she is.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Yes. Okay. So thank you, Xufei. Sorry for being so abrupt in thanking you, but I wasn't sure if we had another speaker, but we do. So before the last part, which is the discussion, we will listen to Jinping Ma. And she has a PhD from the University of Warwick in the UK on the history of mental hygiene promotion in Republic of China. She is interested in transcultural communication, social mobility, public health, and related national strategies. And she is interested in China's current ocean strategy, looking at the connections between the local culture in Fujian in southeastern coastal China and overseas Chinese generated economies. She is currently researching Chinese fisheries off the coast of Mauritania in West Africa, which is another really hotspot of industrial fisheries and Chinese fishing companies. So yes, the word is yours, Jinping.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction, and please accept my apologies for coming late because of the timing misunderstood. And I wanted to start my presentation now, and I will just take my time and try to control it in 10 minutes. So my presentation is about fishing in history and controversy. So it is more about a case study about the Hongdong fishery in Mauritania. I think all our audience have get an idea about the national strategy and the kind of controversies of Chinese fishing in Africa and West Africa. And so I think I wanted to bring the story to another aspect, back to China, to the history, and to see how the actors connected and cooperated behind this kind of a big picture. So I think this study will provide you more about the details and the kind of historical connections and why and what forces drove these Chinese groups and companies travel along to West Africa. Let's start. Sorry. Yeah. So I kind of concluded generally about the Chinese fishing in Africa and the controversies they drove in this area, and I will just kind of quick skip this part. So the other aspect I want to introduce to our audience is that behind these conflicts, we have to know there is a growing demand of seafood and seafood products in China because of the kind of economic development, the living standard change, and the new kind of ideas about healthy eating, like protein. So one point is growing demand of seafood, and another point is that even by now, based on the kind of large amount of demand of seafood, we have to know that there's even much more demand in the future, because the current kind of demand is more about the coastal lines and provinces and cities in China. So there's a great potential for seafood demand in inland China. And because of this, it was estimated that there are 2 million tons of seafood gap between the kind of import and the need in current China eating table. So my presentation is mainly about 3 points. The first one is about Mauritania fishing conditions. So why Chinese travel along to this country and this place rather than the other kind of African countries. And the second one, I moved to the Hongdong Fishery Company as a case study because it shows a very interesting example about complicated composition of Chinese in Mauritania, and it shows a little bit more about state-owned enterprise company and private company and the difference between them. So the third point is more about the other side of the coin, the historical, cultural, and political factors of Chinese marching to West Africa. And this part is more based on my previous 7 years experience in Fujian province. So why Mauritania? I think most of us get an idea about how abandoned the fishing sources there in West Africa, in the whole West Africa coastal lines because of the great natural conditions. So first is, it is one of the best fishing grounds in the world with quite a long, rich coastal lines. And besides this, more than 50 Chinese companies related to fishing industry was established in the last 2 decades in this country. And among them, there were 4 big companies. 2 of them are state-owned by Chinese government, and the other 2 are private. So all of them were located in the free zone in Nahebo, and the free zone is established for mainly about free trade, and the majority of these trades are about fishing. So another point is that this country's politics is relatively more stable in northern part of Africa. So it was estimated for the investors that it's good for long-term business. And besides this, there was a history of conflicting between Chinese investors, workers with local government, local companies, and local society. And even after all the long-term kind of negotiation, there are still many problems to deal with. And some of them are even quite urgent, such as the cultural kind of conflicts, including the religion conflicts, and the kind of cultural mutual misunderstanding between Chinese communities and the local communities. Another aspect is that to deal with all these conflicts, both the companies and the Chinese government has been thinking about new measures to deal with all kind of coming down these conflicts, such as set up Confucius Institutes. So generally, we understand that Confucius Institutes is more about kind of promoting Chinese culture. Actually, in their kind of provisions, we can see that this institute was set up to understand local culture, local religion, to help and support the local business to deal with the conflicts in these aspects. And it also was made use of to provide vocational training to the local workers which haven't been educated. Part of these workers was introduced to China-based Chinese companies to learn, such as coming to China mainland and travel to different cities and companies to learn about like new experience on and to learn Chinese cultures and all the other related supports. So we can know that besides the kind of advanced natural conditions in Mauritania, there are other kind of conditions from both Chinese side and local government and community to mutually constructed a culture and environment for trading and for building up business. So why Hongdong Fishery? So at the moment, Hongdong Fishery is the biggest fishery company in Mauritania. It, as you can see in the picture, even it was set up in the desert, but it was taken up as an example of success investment between Chinese government, and this company was visioning a global picture both in Africa and in South America, and now even got some kind of credits from Central China government to fishing in South Pole. So it is a very special private company, and it can provide us aspects to compare companies' global visioning with the state's global visioning. Even this company has been set up for like more than 10 years. It experienced great difficulties, we have to say. But it enjoys some kind of advantages because of its non-state-owned culture. Nature. Because of this, it gained kind of more credits from local government and supports from local industries. Wait a minute. Yeah. Before it set up its plant in these coastline places, it was the only company that rejected joint venture from Mauritanian before like a further cooperation. So it assured the Chinese control in this place, and it kind of had say to reject the Mauritanian government intervention to their fishing policy or fishing methods because of their control in the interest and in the shares. Yeah, and this is mainly about the general picture of this company. But I think for me, the most important part of this company is about its connections with local China. So currently you can see it was located in Fujian province. Actually, when you invested more, you can see more aspects why this company can get support from the central government and set up its business here. So why Fujian matters? When we just date back to centuries ago, we can see long-term historical connections between Fujian province to overseas Chinese. So these connections was based on its kind of natural and geographical conditions. Actually, in this place, the people's life was kind of difficult because of the lack of farming land. So from this picture, we can see that there are only like 10% of this province was proper for farming, and all the others, majority of the others were mountaineers. So there was a culture that these people was facing to the ocean and so, like trying adventuring and like seeking chances on the sea. So they would like to take up the adventures. This is kind of the geographical reason. And historically, there is a maritime and transocean expansion from this place to Southeast Asia, to South Asia, to Africa, and even to America. So I can provide you several pictures to show the Chinese, the main Chinese expansion on the sea is more about these places. So the first is about the Zhou's voyage in Ming Dynasty. So this kind of voyage is dated back to 6 centuries ago. And actually we can see from here, we can see from the Ming Empire, there was a traveling point called Quanzhou. Actually, Quanzhou was a very important connection point of the Zhou's voyage to the West Africa, to the Western Asia and East Africa. And so we can see more here. Actually, the history of Southeast China is about its expansion to Southeast Asia. Even China Ming China was closing its door and is trading with Japan and with all the other Eastern Asia and Southeast Asia countries. The central government, empire government, cannot totally close the door. All this kind of migration route was originally dated back to these centuries, and even now there are strong kind of lineage and family connections with local China, with Fujian. And later, I will introduce the culture and the connections of these people. So the next one is about Chinese New Belt and Silk Road from the eastern part all the way to Europe. So, yeah. So we can know that behind the kind of the whole picture of national fishing and the state expanding, we have to know that there's historical reasons, geographical reasons, and historical connections to force these private companies and individuals to risk their lives on the sea and all the way to the West Africa. And another point, we have to know that the fishing picture is not stable as just still boards. From historically, we know that the local fishermen has been fighting against the state, even from the empire's period until now. So step back from the national picture, we can see more the details about different actors and their interests, and how these actors' interests cooperated to forge the whole economic picture. Even in Ming Dynasty, the local Fujian fishermen even pretend to be Chinese pirates to rob the local people and the local ship. So their kind of interests completely competes and conflicts with the state policy. And I believe we can find more about this with this case about Chinese fishing in West Africa through this way. So another point I want to make is that, because I think many of us have an idea about the political culture in China. We know that the chairman Xi
Jinping, we are running out of time, so please wrap up.
Yeah, then I will conclude in 1 minute. So we know that Chairman Xi had his mainly local political experience in Fujian, and this experience forced him to kind of support the current Chinese sea strategy and its global invasion. So from this point, we can know that behind the Chinese fishing, there are more aspects we have to take consider about the culture, the cultural specialty, and the political specialty, and the actors, different interests of the actors. So I think from this point, the case study of Hongdong fishery can provide more about the details and deepen our understanding of the general Chinese fishing in West Africa. So I think this slide can be left into discussion in a later time, right?
Thank you very much, Jinping. Very good insight that you have there as a background to study the Chinese investments in Mauritania and other places. So we have 5 minutes left.
Probably we could extend a little bit, maybe a few minutes, if that's possible.
A few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So so we have some studies here that are going to really enrich our understanding of the rationales behind the Chinese expansion in the fisheries in Africa, and also to understand better the interaction between the Chinese and their African, the bureaucrats, the local population, other fishers, African fishers, etc. But I must say that I get quite from the viewpoint of African fish consumers and small-scale fishers, who are the main fish producers in Africa, you know, I get worried because we have some investors here with enormous economic muscles, and they are having seemingly an unlimited market for fish back home, and it's expanding, it's growing. And we have a lot of investments coming in, not only in industrial fisheries, but also in investments in aquaculture and activities that are happening in the coastal zone, on land and in water. So there are very many challenges with regards to resource extraction and Chinese expansion. And I would like to ask, all of you, but we could start with Hang, who was first. I mean, the insight, I think the insight that you will produce in the research will be very valuable to understand better what is going on. And could you say anything about how this insight could contribute to maybe, you know, reduce the danger for increasing the vulnerability of local resource users and consumers?
Yeah, I just very quick, try to be quick in my answer as well. I think one thing that insight I want to generate first, of course, is to see how this the intersection between formality and formalities, right? That's the first insight that we want to get from the field, how to see these things have been formalized in a way through the bureaucratic things. And I think the insights getting from that can be very helpful in terms of especially thinking about, for policymakers in general, I think, to think about how, especially for instance in EU, which has a lot of interest in promoting different institutional reform historically in Africa, to think about when you promote such sectorial institutional reform, for instance, in the fishing sector or in forestry sector, the institutional reform you promote, to what degree is actually sort of a neoliberalized reform that actually creating an enabling environment, facilitating basically international capitals coming into the field of Africa. And then through that kind of reflection, then we can then talk about how we can reframe the reforms we promote in African countries to sort of promote a more autocentric as well as like African users focused institutional reforms that actually can benefit local people. So I think the key aspect I want to get, or kind of potential policy impact here, is really to see how we can switch the angle, or how we switch our thinking about the policy reforms we put on place now in African countries, to switch from this sort of more neoliberalized promoting capitals or trade kind of perspective to really fostering indigenous development, or have a more user focused approach. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And Xufei, do you have anything to say about this too?
Yes. Yes, I think to benefit them to local people, I think at least in the context of Madagascar, so I think there are two ways we can contribute from our research. One is that the focus on the development of agriculture for the ordinary people in Madagascar. So nowadays, most of the Chinese invested agriculture ventures, or even general foreign agriculture ventures, are producing expensive seafood and exporting them back to their home country that's too expensive to be afforded by the local people. So if we can try to redirect this agriculture sector to benefit more the local people with cheaper, affordable agriculture and mariculture food, and that will be a really good thing for local people, especially most of them they live under like $1 per day extreme poverty line, and they are also suffering famine, especially this year. And the other way we can, from our understanding of this marine seafood mobility between Asia and Africa, is that we should highlight other actors in Asia, not only Chinese. Those are traditionally under the radar from traditional existing investigations. For example, those from Hong Kong, those from Singapore, and those from Taiwan. And I'm not sure about the fish, but I am very sure that Hong Kong is the biggest smuggling market for Madagascar turtles and chameleons in Southeastern Asia. And so if we can engage more relevant actors from these areas, and it will also very beneficial for the local ecology. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And Jinping.
Yes, yeah. I think I can read you a kind of sentence I've cited from Christina Seyfried. So the sentence is that African nations are much more in control of their economic relations with China than most people think. Africans have much more agency in their relationship with China than most Westerners are giving them credit for. So China is very flexible in working with every African nation differently. So Christina, this is a presentation of Christina Seyfried in Yale University. So she also mentioned that even though there are kind of many controversies about sustainable fishing in West Africa, so Chinese government have a kind of good view to, to keep their international reputation of in protecting the environment. So I think it's very good if our research can contribute to find the problem and then to make use of this kind of good intention of the government and make use of this and to think how Chinese government get, kind of build up their connections with local governments, and to make use of their contentions, as well as to control the kind of companies like overfishing. I think that's kind of very useful and effective way for us to think about. Thank you.
I want to jump into that question if I can. I think maybe to three of you. Actually, how to ensure that, because what I learned, and there is some kind of tension between the central state and the provincial state when the province are very much concerned with the economic growth rather than environmental protection. So there is some need probably from the central state to put more pressure on educate the provinces. And what I understood, the Chinese fishery management is the mixture of central and provincial government policies, and there are two bureaus. One is the Fisheries Management Bureau under the Ministry of Agriculture and the State Oceanic Administration. And then they have also different kinds of agendas. One is protecting the ocean, so they own the ocean. The other is to protecting the interest of the fishermen. Probably that would be, once again, not that different from the European landscape, but I think the challenge is to make these two different bodies to speak to each other and find some kind of synergy.
Yeah, and I also think that the point about African governments themselves defining how they want to deal with the Chinese is very crucial, because of course that the lack of capacity and the way the politics around this folds out in the African countries, in the signing of contracts and licensing, etc., is extremely crucial for how the Africans themselves govern their resources. And that is in a way a precondition for dealing with the Chinese in a way that is less, could be less damaging, you know, and they have more potential.
Yeah, and also with the Europeans, it seems that some countries now started to negotiate better agreements also, both with China and Europe, which bring more basically revenue to the country. So I think you are perfectly right that the big role is on the African side to protect their interest, because if they not protect, no one will protect their interest.
It seems so. It seems so. Definitely, it seems so. So that is a crucial issue. I think we have to end here, don't we? Because we are a bit over time, and it's been extremely interesting to hear the insights from the Chinese researchers. I have a lot to learn, much to learn from that side. And I think you can indeed bring many useful new perspectives into the debate, more knowledge that so far doesn't exist. So we are looking forward to hear the continuation.
Yeah. So I want to thank you also, Professor Overå, for moderating this session, and to you, Jinping, Xufei and Hang, for wonderful presentations and your insights.